Let me turn to another topic, which is an important one, education. It's no secret that over the past 2 decades or so, Australia's school system has suffered a sharp and sustained decline in standards. The OECD's Program for International Student Assessment, which is known by the acronym PISA, has shown Australia flatlining in outcomes across maths and science, while our own NAPLAN results show 1 in 3 children is failing to meet basic proficiency levels. Here to discuss the outlook for the year ahead, the education editor of The Australian, Natasha Biter. Natasha, welcome to the program. What needs to happen to improve the education standards in our system?
Hello, Kel. I think first of all we need to get screens out of the classrooms in primary schools because they're distracting children and children aren't learning the basics which they need as a platform to think for themselves and to absorb knowledge in high school. So our problem is that too many children just haven't been grasping the basics of reading, writing and maths, and they just fall further and further behind as they go through school. I personally think screens have got a lot to do with that. And in high school as well, probably at least 10% of the class using the laptop are gaming on it or hotspotting something off their phone and not paying attention to the teacher who's trying to, teach them.
Have we got a problem in
this year, though, will be...
Yes. Have we got a problem in that we've now got a generation of teachers who weren't taught the basics themselves because it wasn't happening 20 years ago, and now they don't have the skills to do that for this generation of kids?
That's precisely it. That's why 2026 is a game changer. This is the year that universities have to start, or they've had to change their curriculum for teaching teachers. So they have to ensure that their trainee teachers know how to teach children to read from scratch using phonics-based methods. They need to know how to manage classrooms. They need to have mastered mathematics themselves so they can then teach children confidently. So this has been a long time coming, probably 10 years since the politicians started talking about it. This year, I think we'll start to see some really good changes in the education system.
Mind you, there is a problem with the whole profession because there was a study recently showing something like two-thirds of Australian teachers are suffering from anxiety or depression. And this seems to expose a whole teaching profession which is buckling under a combination of the workload and departmental red tape. And the result is that a whole lot of teachers are quitting or talking about quitting teaching altogether. So how do we ease the pressure on the teachers and shift the focus back to the classroom?
I think the behaviour of a lot of students is also a major problem, particularly in the public schools where they are really bearing the brunt of teaching children with learning disabilities or very extreme disadvantage that might affect their learning. And because the other parents are choosing, private schools. So this puts a lot of pressure on the teachers to be social workers as well as teachers. Again, this year the states and territories have agreed to include student wellbeing as an issue in their funding agreements. So we will be seeing more counsellors and nurses, psychologists in schools to support teachers, so teachers aren't doing this all on their own. The other issue is the curriculum is just way too complicated. It's much more complicated than it needs to be. A lot of it should not be that difficult. So I think the ministers have said they will review the curriculum for mathematics in year 3, so at the start of sort of primary school, which is a good start for teachers. And the other thing is a lot of the red tape. Everything has to be reported to 5 different authorities, and teachers are spending their evenings, typing data into their laptops or trying to send, work out who hasn't returned their form for the excursion. This should be done by administrative staff, not teachers. That's not their job.
Absolutely. Let's turn to the tertiary level and have a look at the universities, because a real emphasis in 2025 was for universities to rein in their foreign student intake. Foreign students make up nearly half of all the enrolments across many of the top 8 group of universities. At the University of Sydney alone, its foreign student revenue sits at around $1.4 billion, B for billion dollars. They've ceased to be communities of scholars, Natasha. They've become businesses. Now, there is a cap on students in place. And because there's now going to be a cap, these big operators, the big universities, are looking to set up offshore campuses to keep the river of gold flowing for them. What can you tell us about that?
Well, they're doing this because any students they enrol in an offshore campus is on top of their quota. So they can enrol as many international students as they want offshore, which is a good thing for Australia. It's good soft diplomacy. It's a win-win. The university gets more money. Australia is educating people internationally, which is good for us, but it's not putting pressure on our infrastructure and the housing, because that's been the inherent problem, is that we've had this massive growth in immigration without our infrastructure keeping up, especially housing, which is causing a bit of community disquiet. So Monash University recently announced they've got a new campus in Jakarta. The University of New South Wales is setting up in India. RMIT, I think 1/3 of their international students are already offshore. So that's a trend we'll be seeing. And it is all about the money, but also about, a soft diplomacy for Australia.
Yes, of course, and the business model doesn't come into it. Just quickly, Natasha, in the wake of the Bondi terror attack, a lot of focus on the role of universities looked at how they were allowing anti-Semitism to fester. Now, you've argued that universities were using free speech as just a fig leaf to try to hide what was going on. Might things change on that front?
Well, this is why we must have a Royal Commission, because these universities, which receive $20 billion a year of public funding, need to be called to account for what happened on those campuses. I was covering this back in, after the Hamas attacks in 2023. All into 2024, we had encampments, we had protests that were very intimidating for other students on campus. Jewish students were saying that they were afraid to go to campus. They were afraid to wear any Star of David. Imagine if someone said, I'm afraid to wear a cross. Yes, if you're a Catholic, I can't go to university because someone's going to give me a hard time, intimidate me, attack me. I mean, we saw at Monash University, named after that great Jewish Australian general, and they had some very intimidating characters coming in from outside and swearing at Jewish students.
Yeah. Look, in 15 seconds, will it get better?
They're all tripping over themselves now to talk about how terrible anti-Semitism is. I wish they'd said it back at the time and done something about it when it was at its peak, instead of turning a blind eye. But now they're getting on board, of course, because of that awful massacre. I think they will be held to account. The government will link funding to student safety, which includes Jewish and Muslim students. Yeah.
Natasha Biter, thank you very much for your time.